approving ballot access laws for minor parties and independent candidates, something the mainstream media is completely oblivious to. Richard, thank you for joining us here on Liberty Talk Radio.
That's a great introduction, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Tell me, were you a hippie back in the old days in Berkeley?
Absolutely not. I
No.
was.
Oh, I'm disappointed. Go ahead. Tell me about it.
I had short hair, and I was very conservative, and I was for Barry Goldwater.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I was for Barry Goldwater too, but I thought everyone that went to Berkeley was right. I knew some guys that went to Berkeley. They were kind of neat. They were really neat guys, but they were really well beyond. They weren't liberal or anything. They were radical. They were well beyond the edge, and they were kind of cool at the time. You know, that was a cool thing to do.
Well, Barry Goldwater came to the UC Berkeley campus, and a bunch of us got to walk with him across the campus
Great.
and talk. I mean, it was a very friendly campus for everybody, really.
All right. Well, enough of the background music. What I'd like to listen. I have a lot of frustrations in life, which I won't go into. But one of them is ballot access. It seems that we have made such little progress in getting the media to give third parties any attention whatsoever. And the comparison that I draw is typically with the British Parliament and the British electoral system, whereby the minor parties are given front row seats. For example, just in the last election for the Prime Minister, they had a debate. And what I thought was interesting is that the minor parties had center stage, and Cameron, who was the reigning prime minister at the time, was all the way at the end where they typically put the third party candidates. And it seems that their system is a lot more democratic, a lot more inclusive than ours. And it seems like year after year we seem to be making progress, but yet you don't hear a word about any third party candidate on the regular news. Not that I'm a news junkie. I hate watching the news because it's all slanted, but I do glance over to see what they're talking about. I never hear the Libertarian Party, for example, being mentioned.
Well, it's not that bad this year. The Gary Johnson, the Libertarian presidential nominee, has been getting a lot of press attention. I mean, it's still far from equal, far from it. But really, the Libertarian Party presidential campaign has never before got as much publicity. It's going to get its second town hall TV show in 2 days on CNN.
My problem with Gary Johnson is not so much him, although he's not libertarian enough for me. You know, he would not be my choice, although I'm going to wind up voting for him because he's not the lesser of two evils type thing, but he's not really totally libertarian. But who we pick for vice president absolutely stumped me altogether, because this guy is a hardcore neocon and belongs in the mainstream and not in the revolutionary front that we have before us.
Well, I have a better opinion of Bill Weld than you do, but let's talk about the ballot access laws, okay?
All right. I'm sorry for going off on a tangent. I'm sorry because I had to get that off my mind. All right. Ballot access. Where are we now?
This country is still one of the worst in the world, but we are making progress, and that's the news, as you said in your introduction, that isn't leaking out in the mainstream media. In order to get a new party or an independent presidential candidate on the ballot in all 51 ballots, and that's 50 states and D.C., this year, right now, it's only 619,000 valid signatures using the easiest method to get on. And when you compare that to the last presidential election, it was 722,000. So it's dropped by about 17% in just 4 years. And you will not read that anywhere, unfortunately.
Right.
We've had big improvements in 6 states in the last 4 years, including your state of Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah. Our state's really tough, and that people work really hard in getting all the signatures. And unfortunately, the way it works is I forgot the number of signatures. And does anyone know the number of signatures here in Oklahoma? I think it's like 35,000 or something like that. And of course, we don't get 35,000. We give them like 58,000. And in days, they automatically disqualify 20,000. And I said, boy, the government works so slowly in every way, shape, or form, but you give them, thousands of signatures, and in a few days they can tell you which ones are valid and which ones are not. I think that's such bunk. But what do you have to? Why does that happen that way?
Well, it's this year for a new party in Oklahoma. It's 24,745.
And I forgot how many signatures we gave them, but we always give them tens of thousands more than they need, and we just about get under the wire. It seems. And I just can't believe that they are literally sitting down and looking up each one and qualifying. It's beyond my comprehension, because government doesn't work that fast. They don't have the staff for it, but yet they become ultra efficient when it comes to that. So we have now, Gary Johnson is in all 50 states. Am I correct?
Well, he probably will be, but he isn't yet, because there's still a lot of petitioning going on. There's about 15 states left where libertarians are still working out in the street. But probably he will be on all 50.
Oh, you know what? I was under the impression that all that petitioning was over and that he was in all 50 states. Well, I guess I was really mistaken on that.
Right.
Most of my ignorance on that.
Most of the state deadlines are in August, and we just started August. So it's very hard for the press to write about this. So I'm telling you, we're still working in 15 states.
Now, what about the other political parties, the Tea Party, the Green Party, the Constitutional Party, whatever they have? Are there any other third parties? And I hate the term third party. I just hate that term, but that's what's being used. I'll use that to identify them. Are they in all 50 states or close to being there, or is the Libertarian Party the only one that's going to make it?
The Libertarian Party is the only one that's going to make it. The Green Party will be second, but they missed South Dakota yesterday, and they really don't have very much hope of getting on in Oklahoma or North Carolina or Indiana. And so I'll predict 44 states for the Green Party.
Okay, that's not bad. Yeah.
And then third is the Constitution Party.
Will the Green Party, for example, take votes from the Republicans, Democrats, or Libertarians?
People talk about take votes away, and I just don't like to use that terminology. Nobody's vote belongs anywhere until it's been cast.
Right. So
this concept that somebody has already voted for a major party and is going to take it away is just not logically correct.
Yeah. Well, I guess many of these people many people who vote in the Green Party or Libertarian Party may not have voted at all. So you're not taking votes from anyone. You're just adding to the voting pool. Am I correct?
That's right. We have tens of millions of people who are registered voters every year who don't vote. So there's a huge pool out there of people like that.
Right. Now, what have you accomplished this election cycle that was different than prior election cycles where you this time you've been more successful than last time?
Well, in 2012, if you're just talking about the Libertarian Party, Gary Johnson missed 2 states. He missed Oklahoma and Michigan. He missed Oklahoma because it was just way too many signatures. So I do thank the Oklahoma legislature in 2015. They lowered the number. In effect, they lowered it in half. However, ironically, Oklahoma still is the nation's toughest state. Yeah. Even after they improved it, it's still the highest number of signatures as a percentage of the electorate. So there's a lot of work to be done in Oklahoma. And furthermore, Oklahoma is one of only, 8 states that doesn't permit write-ins for president. And so Oklahoma really has an obligation to go easy in ballot access because they won't allow write-ins.
Yeah. It's interesting that, we broke away from the British Empire couple hundred years ago, and because of they were so repressive, and we didn't have many rights here in the United States, and we wanted to be free people and whatever. And today, our method of selecting our leaders is a lot more restrictive here than it is, or it appears to be, than it is in the mother country, so to speak. So it looks like the roles have reversed themselves. Is that a true depiction, or is that comic book history that I'm thinking of?
That's true. In Great Britain, anybody can get on the ballot for House of Commons with 10 signatures and a filing fee of £500. And if they get at least 5% of the vote, they get the money back. That means in Great Britain, virtually every district, every election has at least 5 parties on the ballot. Now, in this country, presidential ballot access is bad, but it's not as bad as it is for Congress. The legislatures have often made it easier for president and hard for Congress. So typically, no minor party, no party other than the Democrats and Republicans can get on the ballot in even a majority of the districts for U.S. House. And the Libertarian Party actually got barely over half the seats about 10 years ago, but it's gone back down to about a third of them. And then no other party will even have a sixth of the seats covered. And we even, typically 10% of the districts only have one candidate on the ballot for House.
Yeah. Back in the 2000 election, I was on the Libertarian ticket for U.S. Congress. And that was an experience of a lifetime. And it seems that not only the people on the inside were ambivalent to the Libertarian Party, or belligerent to the Libertarian Party, I should say, but also people outside. For example, there was a major debate, and it was initiated by the League of Women Voters, and I was preparing for it, and then just days before I called, I said, I never received my invite. They said, well, you're not invited. And I said, wait a minute, you're the League of Women. Didn't you fight for Didn't you fight for this? To get people on the ballot? You fought for all of this. I said, why? They said, oh, well, really, it's not our decision. It was the station's decision not to put you on. So I said, who do I speak to? And they gave me the name. I called the guy up, and I said, why aren't I in debate? They said, we're just televising it. They can have McGill or Gorilla on there. We don't care. I mean, it means nothing to us. We're just televising it. We don't determine who's in the debate. So they lied to me, or somebody lied to me, and yet you had the League of Women Voters, the people who are voting for, equal access to voting, et cetera, for everyone, pulling the same restrictions today on the Libertarian Party that were placed on women back, decades ago. And I said, history's starting to repeat itself.
Every state league is different in that. Some state leagues are very good. When they sponsor candidate debates, they're in the habit of inviting everybody who's on the ballot. Other state leagues are just the opposite. It's really strange that one league varies so much from the other. But in a typical midterm year, generally in a majority of states, there are televised debates that include at least some third-party or independent candidates for offices like governor and U.S. senator. It's weird that we're really better off for those office debates, senator and governor, than we are in the presidential debates. For some reason,
Okay, folks, hold on. We're trying to reconnect. We have a internet interruption and line problem, and we are trying to recover from it. So please do not go away. Thank you. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask? Please do. Yeah.
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the beep. I, back in the early, or I should say late 1980s, I attended a Libertarian Party meeting. In fact, the first one that I ever attended, and they were talking about the strategy of the Libertarian Party, and how it's to be a separate party other than it was a separate party other than the Republicans or Democrats. And even back then, I said, you guys are going to be fighting this ballot access every year. There's always going to be a problem. People are going to be thinking Republican, Democrat. No one's going to pay the Libertarian Party any mind, unless you have millions and millions of dollars to constantly promote it and beat it in everyone's head. They're going to think Republican or Democrat. I said, why don't we just run Libertarian? The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable.
Okay.
Please leave a message after the beep.
So I said, why don't we just have a Republican, Libertarian Republicans and Libertarian Democrats? I said, so we get both at the same time. So if the Republican wins, that's a Libertarian, fine. If the Democrat wins, that's a Libertarian Democrat. And in fact, I think they do call them Blue Dog Democrats, and Republicans have another name for those that are Libertarian leaning. Rand Paul was one, and he was not pure Libertarian, pretty close, but of course his father Ron Paul was pure Libertarian. And yet he was in Congress for many years, for several terms. And yet no one has followed that paradigm. I'm not still convinced that the Libertarian Party should exist in the manner in which it is today. Not because I disagree with the Libertarian Party, is because our system is so corrupt. You can't get anybody to give them any airtime. But if you were a libertarian Republican, I mean, Ron Paul and Rand Paul still get on mainstream television. They ask their opinion, maybe not as much as everyone else, but a lot more frequently than someone who is a libertarian and not affiliated with one of the major parties. This way, we could infiltrate the main system. Instead of contaminating it, we can sanitize it at the same time. And at least give those people who are Republican, diehard Republicans, those people are ideologues, here we are, we're back again. We're back, and you're wearing glasses. That's great.
Oh, I'll take them off.
Yes,
I'll take them
we got you
off.
off because you weren't wearing your glasses. Richard, are you there?
Yes, is it working?
Oh, yes, I think we're working now, yeah.
Okay.
Let me, I don't know if you heard what I just said about the...
No, I couldn't hear.
Okay, well, I'll just briefly repeat myself. Back in the 1980s, when I attended a informal libertarian meeting, I said, this doesn't make any sense. I said, you guys are going to be fighting the establishment for the rest of your lives and go nowhere. I said, why don't we just run a libertarian Republican and a libertarian Democrat? That way you could have someone always in the limelight, be in the, be on stage with the other Republicans. They're not going to eliminate, just have some of the Republicans or some of the Democrats. And in fact, there's the blue dog Democrats that are really libertarian, and there's the libertarian Republicans. I don't know what they call them, but and I still think that holds a lot more credence because you have the Rand Pauls of this world that's almost libertarian. Of course, Ron Paul, which is the most famous, well-known libertarian congressman, and he got a substantial amount of press, at least relative to those running for office as a libertarian. What do you think of that proposal?
Well, I think Gary Johnson this year, you'll see, is going to get more attention than Rand Paul did.
Oh, okay. So you don't agree. You think the Libertarian Party should be separate from the two political parties?
That's right, because the trouble with running libertarians as Republicans or Democrats is even if they get elected, they don't have the voter mandate to do libertarian things. Whereas if a libertarian gets elected as a libertarian, it's obvious to everybody that, look, the voters knew he or she was a libertarian, and that's what they wanted. So they're in a much stronger position.
Okay. My only point is that we keep on fighting this ballot access. We spend so much time just trying to get on the ballot. By the time we get on the ballot, everyone's exhausted, Then we get our 2% or whatever, 3%, and then we all go home, and then we start this battle all over again. If I ran for office again, I would run really as a libertarian Democrat, for example. At least I can talk the issues. And I think a lot of people would agree with me. At least people would show up. And, the debate, at least I would be there with the front runners and saying, they're wrong. This is why they're wrong. And I can be heard. Right now, if there is a libertarian debate, 3 people show up and everybody else stays home. I don't see the logic in that at all.
We have covered only the number of signatures declining, but we haven't yet talked about the number of votes needed for a party to stay in the ballot. Now, this year, the Oklahoma legislature lowered the vote test for a party to stay in the ballot from 10% to 2.5%. And all the polls are showing Gary Johnson's easily going to get that.
Right.
I fully expect the Libertarian Party will get enough votes this year so it won't need to petition for 2018.
Let me ask you, it seems that even the major banks, the big banks, are projecting a severe slowdown in the economy. Most economists that worth their salt know that we're running at the end of the road right now as far as keeping this phony economy alive. I mean, the patient got really sick back in 2008, and all we did was pump in the morphine into the patient to make him feel better. And we've been doing that every year through quantitative easing and all this other Mickey Mouse economics. And now, we're injecting morphine into the patient, but the patient's dead. So most are being the economy. And it looks like many economists, I mean, well-known economists are saying the road to the end is very, very short. The distance is very, very short, and watch out. So, what do you think will happen? Will the Libertarian Party actually gain by a downturn in the economy?
Oh, that's way too hard.
That's why we
so
pay you
much.
the big bucks. You know that.
It depends on who's president when it happens, who's got, which party has Congress. That's just, you might as well ask anybody in the street as ask me that.
Okay.
That's not my area of expertise.
Yeah. I tell you, I would not want to be the president, this term around, because whoever gets into office, and if there's a severe downturn, which they project much worse than 2008, of course the reigning president always gets blamed. They like to blame everyone else, but the populace is going to sort of blame them because they're not going to know how to get out of it, because there is no way to get out other than to reset everything. As David Stockman said, the great reset's going to set in, and it's going to be extremely painful for everyone. So I'm not sure if this is a good year for the Libertarian Party. Possibly next year, because I think the next election, because people will be looking for someone to save them, and they know it's not going to be the Republicans, it's not going to be the Democrats, it's got to be someone else, and I hope we're there to show them the way.
I'm gonna suggest something that's a little different from the topic you've been on, and I haven't thought this through very hard, so I may be sorry, but I think it would be in the interest of every American if Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump would go off somewhere and have a personal meeting. And it's just not healthy for the country to have the two people who are most likely, one of them will be president, to be basing their campaigns on the theme that the other one is a horrible, horrible person.
Right.
It's not good for anybody. And I don't see that in other democratic countries. I do not perceive that leaders of the major parties of other countries demonize their opponent that way. So I just threw that out. I have no idea how you're going to react, but I said it.
Well, no, I agree. I wonder if the dialogue would be the same if, in fact, ballot access was as easy in America as it is in England, where you had not two people, but you had each party given equal time. In other words, you wouldn't have two people fighting it out. There may be 5 people on the ballot. Thus, they'd be more apt to be talking about the policies. For example, wars overseas, the amount we spend on the military, government health care versus free market health care. In other words, I think if you had all the parties on equal standing, although, they're not exactly equal as far as weight is concerned, but given the same amount of publicity and time on the air, I think they wouldn't be attacking each other. They'd be tackling the issues. Would you tend to agree with that?
I certainly do. I saw there was one, last year Britain had a general election, and there was one 7-party debate, and I watched that. And everybody was very civilized, clear, polite. In fact, that debate was considered a huge success by the British press. And there was only one 7-party debate, but they had a couple 5-party debates. I mean, I'm not saying they're always perfect either, but so much better than here. And also I saw the Canadian 5-party debate. They also had a general election last year. And again, the tenor of the whole thing was so much elevated. I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. We have someone in our studio today. He's a guest. He just wanted to sit in, but he does have a question. Gary, take it away.
Yeah, I am completely ignorant of all of this. I'm kind of a media troll, I guess. And I had a question about how did we even get here? Is the reason that we only have a 2-party system because the libertarians don't have enough money, or is it like a systematic, I guess, oppression of the third party or whatever? Like, what creates the situation we're in, and how did that start?
It started with government printed ballots. Before 1888, there were no government printed ballots in this country. Voters were free to make their own ballots, and some did. Others didn't want to go to all that work, so they'd pick up a ballot printed by their favorite party. But they were perfectly free to take a party printed ballot and scratch off the names they didn't like and write in other names. So the government had no say whatsoever in who could run for office. There was no such thing as a filing fee or a petition or a declaration of candidacy. The government had nothing to do with it. And in that fluid system, 3 times one of the major parties died off and was replaced by another one. So we had a real free market in politics. First, there were the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party, and the Federalists died off. And then the National Republican Party rose to take its place. That was the party that ran at John Quincy Adams for president in 1828 and Henry Clay in 1832. And it died off, and the Whig Party replaced it. And the Whigs were pretty strong for a quarter of a century, and then they died off, and we temporarily had a 4-party system, but the Republicans beat off the American Party, and and so then we had the Democrats and Republicans. But we're the only country in the world that are stuck with the same 2 parties that we had 150 years ago.
Well, how did the government weasel into that? How did they even do that in the first place?
Well, they took over the job of printing the ballots, and generally they were very fair at first. The typical state law said any group that holds a convention and nominates candidates, just send them in to the state government elections office and we'll print it on the ballot. Most states didn't even require a petition at all. But when the state legislatures realized, hey, we can change these laws any way we want, and they were yielded to the temptation to throttle new parties. The first really evil ballot access law was in 1893, Nevada. Ironically, a third party did it. The Silver Party had an overwhelming majority in the Nevada legislature, and they didn't like the People's Party. So they raised the petition all the way up to 10% of the last vote cast, hoping to keep the People's Party off the ballot. And one state would do it, then another state would do it, and it got worse and worse and worse. And it absolutely got the absolute worst in the 60s. And they've been getting better since then, partly thanks to the courts. And another thing that keeps the 2-party system stuck here with the same 2 parties is, of course, what we've been talking about, the commission and presidential debates, not letting in anybody but the Democrat and Republican.
Okay. Tell me, worldwide, how does the United States stand as far as ballot access is concerned, allowing parties to participate in the debates, that whole arena, the whole theater? How do we stack up to the rest of the world, including Russia? Is Russia much worse than us, or is it more free in Russia than it is here?
Russia started copying our ballot access laws. When Russia started having multi-party elections, at first it was pretty fair, but then they thought, hey, we can change this, and the Russian government has made ballot access worse and worse. The worst countries in the world for ballot access. Okay, we first of all set aside the countries that just don't have free elections at all because they're one-party states. That's China, Vietnam, North Korea, and then Saudi Arabia really doesn't allow elections at all.
Right.
And Iran is pretty bad. Technically, Iran has all nonpartisan elections, and the mullahs decide who gets on the ballot. So those are the worst. But then after that, we have just a handful of countries, and Russia's the most important one, that has copied our ballot access laws. Really, it's a very sad thing to say, but the United States is one of the worst countries in the world for freedom of letting people run for office. The worst is Georgia. Georgia has not permitted anybody but a Democrat or Republican to run for U.S. House of Representatives since 1964. They require about 20,000 signatures for anybody else to run for U.S. House, and nobody can do it. I don't know if your listeners have ever gone out and tried to petition. It's hard work.
Right.
It's psychologically difficult. You have to ask strangers to do you a favor, and a lot of people find it very hard. And I once collected 100 signatures for a libertarian here in California, and I was amazed how hard it was. It took me a month. I went out in the street in front of a movie theater where people were standing in line. I thought, well, gee, they're just standing in line. They're bored. So they shouldn't mind me asking them to sign this petition. So after a while, the theater manager came out and told me to get off the sidewalk, even though it was a public sidewalk. And then everybody heard that. So I refused to go, but then everybody thought I was a bad guy and nobody would sign. I mean, if you haven't tried it, you may not realize how hard it is.
Yeah. So you're saying, Richard, that at one time Russia actually had a easier access to the electoral system than the United States, but then they started to copy the United States.
That's right.
Well, that, it's amazing because we say, well, we don't want to be like Russia. Russia's copying us and they're going downhill. I love that. Nothing ceases to amaze me anymore. It's absolutely. All right, tell us, where do we stand now, and what are some of the things to come that will improve the ballot access?
Well, the courts are pretty good this year. We've won several really significant court decisions. Part of the problem of winning in court was the Supreme Court did a horrible thing in 1971. Georgia said Democrats and Republicans don't need any signatures at all to get themselves in a primary ballot. They just pay a fee. But anybody else who wants to run needs a petition signed by 5% of the number of registered voters.
That's a lot of votes, signatures.
They made a mistake. Here's what they thought. This case was filed in 1970. And the state of Georgia, in its defense, said, well, it's not so hard because in 1966, the Republican candidate for governor did it. And in 1968, George Wallace did it. So the Supreme Court was tricked in a way. They thought, oh, how hard could it be?
Right.
The state says somebody did it in 66 and somebody did it in 68. Well, George Wallace was so popular back then in the South, he got over 50% of the vote as a third-party candidate in Georgia. It's not surprising he could do it. And as far as the 1966 example, well, that was the Republican Party. They had a lot of money. They hired 30 paid petitioners. But they should have realized if they had just taken a closer look, this law had existed since 1943 and that's the only 2 times in history that anybody had ever done it. But they didn't know that.
Right.
So we're stuck with that decision, but slowly the lower courts are starting to realize this was a goofy decision and they're not following it as much as they used to. So we've won 31 cases around the country against a high number of signatures, and we've had 2 of them just this year. So things are getting a little better with the courts.
You think things are getting better because people have been so disenfranchised? They're voting for Donald Trump not because he's Republican, but because he's sort of perceived by many to be anti-establishment. And so many people were voting for Bernie Sanders because he was perceived to be an independent and not a Democrat. So do you see this helping the cause?
I think you're right. Although the 2 court cases, one of them was in Georgia. It was just for president. They struck down the 50,000 signatures for president and said 7,500. But that happened in March of this year I think it was before people really thought Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee.
Yeah.
And then the more recent one was from Maryland. And Maryland had a funny law. It was 10,000 signatures for a new party, but 41,000 to be an independent candidate for statewide office. And that's just I don't know what caused us to win that, but we won it. Well, they said, that's silly. Why should an independent have to get so many more signatures than a minor party? So Maryland lowered it for an independent to 10,000.
In other states, if you want to run as an independent, do you still need to get signatures, or can you just run as an independent? I mean, independents get a free ride, so to speak.
In most states, independents need as many signatures as a minor party.
Okay.
And then there's some states where they need fewer, and some states where they need more. I mean, the variety of laws around the country is staggering. I mean, the most extreme example is Tennessee. If you're an independent, you only need 25 signatures to run for any office, whether it's governor or sheriff.
25 total.
Right, except for president.
I'm moving now. I'm going to run for office.
But if you're a party, you need 41,000 signatures. So we have a case pending there, and we're just saying this is ridiculous. If Tennessee is so relaxed about people getting in the ballot, they're letting independents on for 25 signatures. Why does a minor party need 41,000? So we'll get a decision from that in a few weeks. I'm hoping we'll win. We'll see.
Oh, that's right. Well, why couldn't a person run as a independent libertarian?
Well,
I mean, let's cheat the system. They're cheating. Well, let's get around the cheating.
People are very influenced in their voting by what appears on their ballot. And many people may want to vote for a libertarian, but if the libertarian is on as an independent, the voter won't know who the libertarian is.
Yeah.
And since it's so easy, there tends to be a lot of independent candidates in Tennessee for important office. So it's hard to stand out.
Well, I guess many libertarians, if they ran as an independent, most libertarians just don't have the financial resources that the mainstream Republicans and Democrats, because they have tons of funds coming in because they're part of the establishment and they already have themselves a basket of money from which they can run, where the libertarians are usually start with the money in their wallet and moving forward. So they're not the Donald Trumps of this world where they can, like Donald Trump, if he ran as a libertarian, it would be very different than me running as a libertarian.
Yeah, but fortunately, the person who has the most money doesn't necessarily win the election. When Jesse Ventura was the Reform Party candidate for governor of Minnesota, he only had 1/10 as much money as either the Democrat or the Republican, but he still won. If you have a good message and you have enough money to get it out, you don't need to be the biggest spender.
I agree. But he did have a big name. I mean, everyone, he was sort of the darling of the political arena at the time, and he had the notoriety around him and the panache and all the fanfare around him that people listened because they knew him.
Well, it helped also that every debate for governor in Minnesota included him. And there were lots and lots of them.
Yeah.
See, Minnesota is one of those states that has a more favorable tradition about including people in debates.
Yeah. All right. What could we look forward to in the future? We're almost out of time now. We have a couple more minutes. Can you move us forward and sort of give us an idea of what we have to look forward to and what will happen in your prediction?
Well, we're going to get a lot of ballot access decisions this month, so there's that. And there's 2 cases pending against the Commission and Presidential Debates rules for getting into the debates. We have that to look forward to. And, well, I'm stumped. I can't think of anything else. Maybe you can think of something.
Well, if Gary Johnson gets a more than expected standing in the number of votes, let's say it gets 15-20% or something like that, will that make your job easier?
Well, if Gary Johnson got 5% of the vote for president in the whole country, general election public funding would kick in. And the Gary Johnson presidential campaign in December 2016 would get at least $15 million from the federal government. And in 2020, whoever the Libertarian nominee is for president, he or she would also get at least $15 million for the campaign.
Now, when do they get this money in? And would this be after the vote? After the general election?
Right, yes, it would happen twice, but the first time it would happen would be in December, the month after the election. Now, John Anderson in 1980 was an independent presidential candidate.
Right.
And he went way in debt during the campaign because he was hoping and counting on the fact that he'd get at least 5%. and the bankers thought he would get at least 5%, so they were willing to lend him a lot of money. And lucky for him and lucky for the banks, he did. He got 6.7%. So he got millions of dollars from the government in December 1980, and he was able to pay off his debts.
I say.
That's how it works.
Well, I'm going to make a prediction. You want to hear it?
Okay?
Okay, here it goes. I think the economy is going to get so bad here in the United States and worldwide. It's sinking worldwide. The world's in negative interest rates. Whatever that's. I mean, I understand that, but it actually makes no sense when you think about it from an economic point of view. That who's ever president, things are going to be so bad under the next presidential watch that people will be looking for a third-party candidate, and I think the Libertarian Party will gain more from a down economy because people will be looking for an alternative outside of the mainstream. That's my prediction. What do you think of that?
Well, I hate to hear bad news, and I hate to hear that the country and the world is going to be in a terrible, terrible economic plight in the future. That's not
if it does,
my area of
let's assume it
expertise.
does. Just for the sake of discussion, if it does, if there's a big downturn, let's say 2008 squared.
Well, the thing is, it all depends on the nature of the crisis and what people perceive to be the cure for it. It might not benefit to the Libertarian Party's benefit. It depends. I mean, it might be for the benefit of some authoritarian solution. I mean, generally, when the economy goes bad, the kind of people that get elected are not the best. So, but it's way.
I agree. Okay. All right. I'd like to give you the last word.
Well, I just want to thank you. This is the second time you've had me on your show, and it's a lot of fun. You're really a great host, and I praise you and hope you keep going.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on our program. We hope you will accept our invitation to return again at a later date.
Okay.
Okay,
Good.
Thank you so much. Folks,
Okay,
this is the end
bye.
of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends. Let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.